What an exciting day for Bitcoin. We have some big news to talk about. Bitcoin yet again, hit all-time highs. It seems like it's doing this almost every day. And we also have record inflows in terms of the spot Bitcoin ETFs, and we'll talk about that too. And Ethereum successfully rolled out its Dencun upgrade, and we'll touch on that as well. And first off, the spot Bitcoin ETFs. This is big news. We now crossed $1 billion in net inflows in a single day. This is a record. And as time goes by from launch, we aren't actually seeing less interest, we're seeing more interest. Records are being broken, projections are being broken, money keeps flowing into these spot Bitcoin ETFs. And check out what GSR analyst Brian Rudick said. The US spot Bitcoin ETFs have been widely successful, well beyond even the most optimistic expectations. Their 10 billion plus of inflows in just 2 months is approaching what most thought they would do in the first year. And there's also arguments for why inflows may increase from here, such as greater issuer sales efforts, marketing, addition to wealth manager product offerings, hedge funds, large money managers getting into these spot Bitcoin ETFs finally. We know that there are still limitations. There are still certain entities that don't allow trading of these spot Bitcoin ETFs. And another thing to consider too is obviously normalizing GBTC outflows and the day that we'll actually see inflows in general for GBTC. And we will touch on Bitcoin in just a second here, but Bitcoin nears 74,000 as these Bitcoin ETFs set a new record. And this 1 billion in net inflow equates to about 14,700 Bitcoin. And check it out here. We have $849 million as of yesterday in IBIT in BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF. And what are we seeing in terms of outflows for GBTC? Well, this was a $79 million outflow day. We have seen similar times like this where the outflows dried up a little bit, but then they went and increased again. So keep an eye on GBTC's outflows. Maybe we start seeing inflows here for the first time in a couple weeks. But I do think the selling pressure is starting to die down. And the most we've seen as of recently is right around $590 million day. This was back in late February. But the largest amount of selling was still back when these spot Bitcoin ETFs were first introduced. We were seeing outflows of around 400 to 600 million pretty consistently. And now it has generally dried up a bit. But keep an eye on GBTC outflows. And also another big milestone soon we will probably cross is seeing BlackRock's ETF alone surpassing 1 billion. I do think it's a matter of time until we see that. And Bitcoin went and set a new all-time high again today. We got awful close to that 74,000. It's crazy to think, you know, only a few months ago we were talking about Bitcoin in the 20,000s and the 30,000s. It's almost a dream seeing Bitcoin here in the 70,000s now. And I think a lot of us really don't realize, you know, how big this is that we're now at all-time highs again. It seems like Bitcoin did this in a blink of an eye this cycle, and things are definitely getting a bit euphoric, but we can definitely run some more. But just be aware that, you know, things are getting due to retrace a little bit. We are due to see little corrections along the way. Maybe another one of these type of corrections, roughly a 10% flash crash, which Bitcoin has been following. So keep an eye on this trend line. Now I usually pull up the moving averages on daily time frames, but on the 4-hour, it does seem like Bitcoin's following the 50 MA, bouncing off of it, or it's bouncing off of this ascending trend line. So keep an eye on both of these. If we see a break of this trend line, we could start heading lower and testing previous levels of supports. But I still do see Bitcoin as a DCA, and I do still see Bitcoin much higher in price by the end of this year. But there will certainly be some small corrections along the way at the very least. And speaking of corrections, while some analysts are eyeing $150,000 price targets, some are saying we're due for a correction, saying things like there are increasing signs of overheating, and we could experience a significant drop before the halving in April, which would fall in line in 2020's correction and the 2016 correction. The difference here is we aren't dealing with a once-in-a-lifetime health event like 2020, and the other difference is we now have spot Bitcoin ETFs propping up Bitcoin's price. Anytime it pulls back, we will probably see even more inflows. And with the Bitcoin halving coming around and the incoming supply being cut in half, any correction, if we do see it, you better be jumping on it. I can't tell you what to do, but I know I will be buying Bitcoin if we see a sizable correction. Regardless, I'm going to just be DCAing along the way. But I do think it's a good idea to keep cash on the side. I know that's an annoying thing to hear, but you do want to be ready for the unexpected. You do want to be ready if we see a flash crash, a 10, 20, 30% drop somehow. It'll be a good feeling knowing that you can buy into it and that you didn't just go all in and you don't have any cash to throw in if we do pull back. So try to keep your reserves ready. And these analysts also mention that this year Bitcoin has experienced an 18% pullback in January, a 14% early March pullback. Therefore, it's possible that a pre-halving retrace, if one does occur, would be more on the shallower side. And you can see here in the last cycle, we popped up here, started a retracement before going on to rally after the halving. but we did have this reaccumulation phase right after the halving. I think this target, this roughly 50,000 target they're circling, I think that's a little unrealistic. Could we see the low 60s? Certainly. But I don't know, with this kind of buying pressure from the spot Bitcoin ETFs, with the halving so close, I think anyone selling Bitcoin for short-term profits would be making a drastic mistake. And while, yeah, maybe we pull back and it looks like the right decision, overall, when you look from the end of 2024, I bet most people will regret selling their Bitcoin at a time like this right now. Now, moving on to Ethereum, we did just get the Dencun upgrade. It seems to have gone through successfully, and this is something that really helps L2s. It helps the other chains using Ethereum, but overall it will help Ethereum's ecosystem. And it looks like so far we're not seeing a sell-off on this positive news, a buy the rumor, sell the news type of event. Typically when you see these types of catalysts coming forwards, you get a little bit of hype beforehand, and then people take profits when the catalyst comes. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book, but it looks like Ethereum's holding up pretty strong. One thing I am watching and anticipating is a pullback to this trend line. Ethereum for quite a long time has been following this trend line, and there are times when it retraces, bounces, and tests it as support, and that could potentially bring us to a $3,700 Ethereum. Looking at Ethereum, we are a bit overbought on the daily, and last time we saw an overbought RSI similarly, we did rally a little bit more before retracing nearly 20%. So, you know, we could definitely continue running before we see a little retracement, maybe 15%, maybe a 20% retracement. Maybe we don't see it. But the thing is, we are a bit overbought, and in history we have seen some corrections when we get to these levels. Now, looking at the weekly, Ethereum is also still overbought, although we have seen a much more overbought RSI in previous halving cycles. However, this does come later in the cycle, so it's kind of strange to see Ethereum at these levels on the RSI this early in the cycle. Maybe my suspicion is that since we saw all-time highs before the halving, we're also going to see the peak much earlier than the previous peak. I could be wrong there, but I think the market is front-running the halving, and that doesn't mean we won't see a huge rally after the halving, but that means that in 2025, the peak will probably come in a bit earlier. Comparing 2025 to 2021, which was the peak of the last halving cycle, we basically saw the peak towards the end of 2021, whereas I think this time we'll probably see the peak towards mid 2021, maybe early 2021. However, at the same time, maybe this spot Bitcoin ETF buying pressure causes us to see a later cycle peak. I don't expect it. I personally do think that since all-time highs coming in early, not in terms of Ethereum's not even at its all-time high, but in terms of Bitcoin, in terms of the general crypto ecosystem, I do think all-time highs are going to come in earlier, and crypto winter may come around a little bit earlier this time. And that's definitely looking ahead of things, since we're not even at the halving yet, but it's always good to try to look ahead as far as possible and try to set a plan in place and stick to it, unless market dynamics change, of course. Now, I do want to mention CleanSpark. It looks like we're following this general uptrend. Found support here the other day at this like 1550 area, which is a level on this ascending support line. It was a previous resistance. Seems like market reacted to a breakout of it. Maybe that was just a breakout of this previous resistance, more likely. But regardless, we did see a couple bounces on this previous line, this trend line, as a support. So I think that's important to keep an eye on, this ascending trend line. And people that were yelling about this potential head and shoulders, well, we're already pretty much down. We've already filled out that pattern. I do think we're ready to set up for our next move up. I personally, at this point in the cycle, find it highly unlikely that we'll see $10 or $12 CleanSpark ever again. But of course it's possible, and of course I could be wrong. And you definitely want to potentially plan for it if it does happen. But I would be a happy buyer of CleanSpark in the 13s, 14s, and on the way down to this gap fill. Now, while I'm overweight on CleanSpark, it's my largest position in terms of the Bitcoin miners. I've been lately buying BTBT, Sphere 3D, Iris Energy, for example. But you know, CleanSpark is still down 25% from its recent peak, and I do think it's a good buy here. CleanSpark is going to continue to aggressively grow their hash rate, and in my eyes, they're going to continue to be the best Bitcoin miner out there in terms of all-in cost to mine Bitcoin, in terms of aggressive growth, and also in terms of when they sell their Bitcoin. These guys were the most notorious, in my eyes at least, when I look back in the previous crypto winter. They were steadily selling their Bitcoin while other Bitcoin miners were really focused on holding. In hindsight, CleanSpark did the right move by utilizing that Bitcoin to fund future growth, and now just look how big they are. Back in the last cycle, these guys were unknown in terms of Bitcoin mining. They were a microgrid service. They got into Bitcoin mining during all the hype. They really took advantage of their growth during the bear market. And let's face it, they also diluted as well. But I think a lot of us understood, you know, the big picture. A lot of us were okay with this dilution because we believed in the growth of the company. We believed the company was doing the right moves with that money that shareholders basically provided them. If it wasn't for us believing in this company, they might not be as successful as they are. But we're going to continue to see, you know, these exahash growth announcements. we're going to continue to see them acquire more businesses, acquire more turnkey Bitcoin mining operations, where all they have to do is throw some Bitcoin miners in and get to hashing right after they acquire the business. But CleanSpark is going to continue to aggressively grow, and I do personally believe that one day they will flip Mara. Of course, I could be wrong in that, and honestly, they don't need to flip Mara. They have come an extremely long way from where they were in their early stages of Bitcoin mining. And now they're a serious, a heavy hitter, a big player in the Bitcoin mining game. They're a profitable Bitcoin miner, which I think is huge. And I do think post-halving, they will see profitability again in a pretty short amount of time. But I'm very bullish on CleanSpark. If you can't tell already, let me know, guys, what's your top Bitcoin miner of all time? And just because CleanSpark is my top pick doesn't mean other Bitcoin miners can't outperform it. I do think a lot of these smaller cap Bitcoin miners can see some huge multiples. And I do think it's a matter of time. I do think the Bitcoin halving is kind of weighing these down just because of rewards being cut. But I've told you guys the big picture. Bitcoin's price appreciation will more than make up for the Bitcoin rewards being cut. But let me know your thoughts down below. What miners have you been picking up and what cryptos have you been picking up lately? I do think now is a great time to be picking up a lot of the altcoins and dispersing some funds into them as well. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.